Hi everyone, Kevin McElvaney here, host of Pro Wrestling INDIEstrated, the indie wrestling focused arm of the Pro Wrestling Illustrated podcast family. I will get this intro down one of these days, but I'm just going to go with that. And I am joined from the jump by a guest for the first time, referee Odie Brown, who has reached out very kindly to see about any kind of exposure and positive media representation for referees in Pro Wrestling Illustrated and our podcast. So first of all, thank you for joining us here today.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much for having me here. And I totally empathize with the whole trying to get your intro situated thing. I've definitely in my own podcast had a couple of times where I've had to just, let's just do that again. That was no good. That was garbage. And thank you very much for having me. I really appreciate that you're giving an opportunity, not just to myself, but to referees as a community to kind of share our stories a little bit so that, people can realize that it's not just some random person in stripes. It's a human being that has a story and a personality and a life and dreams and goals and all that good stuff. So thank you.
Well, yeah, very, very happy to do it. So you reached out, I think, maybe to Pro Wrestling Illustrated specifically, then to me individually. Mm-hmm. Very professional, but persistent. Like you wanted to make sure that you were able to put some things out there, because I mean, referees, it's this thankless business. In storyline, out of storyline, it's how it is. You work really hard. You're not given the glory. You're not there for the glory, but
sure,
a little recognition for the hard work would be nice now and then, right? So, what was it that that you wanted to get out there, just off the bat? I mean, I realize that's very high level, very general.
Sure. I can definitely go off of that though. My goals, to the community as a whole, to the internet wrestling community, have always been trying to promote the referee community as a whole. My personal goals, I take care of that on my own. I obviously have my own referee career, but I created the community that I'm sure we're going to talk about quite a bit, Zebra Talk, about 4 years ago. And it was just wholly motivated by this idea that many, many, many times I've walked into a locker room for the first time and people have just assumed I was going to be a bad referee, because that's been their experience with a lot of people, because we didn't have trainers, or because of misconceptions about you can just put a shirt on anybody and they'll be able to ref a match because all you have to do is count 3. You hear that kind of stuff all the time in pro wrestling. So it was my intention to not only identify who my peers were in the world of pro wrestling, but to try and give them a platform and a network to try and learn from each other. So that's kind of akin to what led me to knocking on the Pro Wrestling Illustrated door, which actually predates the conversation we've been having for a number of years. I was actually trying to have a conversation with your predecessors for a number of years. That I really appreciate you opening the channel of communication, because it was not reciprocated before, and I totally understand. There's not exactly a large audience for referees, and there shouldn't be an audience for referees. Obviously, we're not the focus of the show, but yeah, my original intention for a number of years was there's a Pro Wrestling Illustrated top 500 of wrestlers. Not that I would want to be on it, but the thought in my mind is, okay, well, why can't we have a top 50 of referees, and maybe I can write it, or help facilitate it, or make the right connections, or whoever it is that writes it. I never really wanted to use it as a platform to promote myself.
Right.
It's just what I've been doing with Zebra Talk all along, is trying to elevate the community, elevate the recognition to an extent of the people that, like I said, are human beings, and they put in a lot of miles and they put in a lot of hard work, and there's something to be said about knowing the name of the person who's in the ring,
Right. I mean, you've touched on a lot there.
Yeah, I kind of go around a lot. ADHD is a real
and I
thing.
believe I said to you in my response, I mean, I like the idea of a referee list. You can make a list for anything in pro wrestling, and there would be a good case for doing that. Managers, promoters, I mean, almost anything. since we already have now 3 big lists, I was a little bit hesitant to take on, another list, but I do think that there's room within the pages of the magazine, and haven't delivered on that yet, but do plan to kind of make space for the referees, especially on the independent level, because I mean, some of the referees on television are a little more recognizable, and maybe I mean they that's actually a bad answer because they need space as well. But
I was
in the
actually
spirit of
going to
this,
say, I've always appreciated the fact that the top 500 does include everyone who's on television, because it recognizes professional wrestling as a whole community, as
Mhm,
opposed to saying like they're the pros and we're the indie guys and like here's a
right,
list for us and here's a list for them. Like, yes, the top 50, if we did have a list or whatever the number is for referees, would be mostly contracted like television referees, but for
right,
good reason. They're the uh the most elite level of people that are doing the job right now. And
right.
aside from a select few, your Charles Robinsons and your Mike Chiodas and your Hebners and whoever else, like for the most part, most people don't know the names of even the people who are on their television right now. And they don't need to be the stars of the show, but like I said, there is some space for knowing the name of the person who's in the ring, I think.
And you brought up a fair point about this kind of anonymity if someone doesn't know who the
Mhm.
referee is, especially on an independent show, say. Um, Someone assuming the worst, like, okay, who's this person? Like, how did
Yeah.
they get the referee shirt? Who told them they can do this? In reality, at least the referees who are doing things the right way and the way they're supposed to
Mhm.
um, go through quite a bit of training and prep themselves. I mean, it's not something that you can just get in the ring and do well, at
Sure.
least. Could you talk a little bit about how you got started and what, if any, official kind of training you
Yeah,
may have undertaken?
absolutely. So that's actually been a big hill that I've been like not necessarily dying on, but like kind of it's been a big fight that I've been a part of over the last couple of years, is like trying to change the way that referees are trained, because myself personally, many of my peers, the majority of referees that I know, honestly, we were trained to referee at a wrestling school. And what I mean by that is that I went to a wrestling school. I was taught how to do the things that the wrestlers were doing. And then when it was time to referee the matches, they said, go do it.
Mhm.
And that was the extent of my referee training. Luckily, I was living in a community where there were many very successful veteran referees who would come and go and come like let me pick their brain, and they would tweak how I did certain things and they would give me advice and things like that. But that was one of the main catalysts for making Zebra Talk, was like there aren't referee trainers out there. Schools just don't have them because like for the most part, you'll go to a wrestling school and there'll be like 20 kids that are there learning how to wrestle. And, even from my own personal experience, like I was the one person that was at my school learning to ref. And then another one came along eventually who's a good friend of mine, but like, there's just not really so much of a demand for it. And for a long time, like referees were like wrestlers who got hurt, or people thought they were too small, or they weren't as successful as they wanted to be and they tried a different route, or like whatever it was. But like there was this huge stigma for years about referees being either like the guy who couldn't make it as a wrestler, or the promoter's friend or younger brother, or just some dude who, like, I've literally heard of people being like given the job as like winning a raffle that night. um I'm like, that's my whole point of what I'm trying to do with like the network, and like
Mhm.
with podcasts like this, is like I'm trying to encourage more growth in the world of like actually like standardizing a real form of training for referees, so that you don't have that stigma of like you walk into a building and like, oh, who's this guy, he's probably going to ruin my match, you know what I mean?
Yeah, I mean, that's a big task to take on. Especially there's this extensive network of referees out there,
Hmm.
stationed in different areas. Many, of course, travel just as the wrestlers do, even
Right.
along with the wrestlers. Um, you mentioned, of course, Zebra Talk. So Zebra Talk is a podcast, and I believe you also have some kind of, is it a Facebook group or something like that, that for
So
the,
if
yeah.
you don't mind, I'll just go ahead and dive into it.
Yeah.
Zebra Talk originally started as a private group on Facebook.
Got it.
It was something that I created as a network to meet who the other referees were out there in the world and give them a chance to talk to the more veteran peers that could answer our questions. So we didn't have to just wait for them to show up in our town and be like, hey, I've been doing this wrong this whole time. Can you tell me how to do it right so I don't get yelled at anymore? And what started with me having like 30 members that I knew personally, I just told everybody that was in the group, any referee that you know, any level of experience, whether they're, Earl Hebner or somebody who started training yesterday, or even somebody who's retired, somebody, who's a promoter now or a wrestler now, whatever, but anybody who's ever worn the stripes, we all have experiences that we can share with each other so we can learn from them.
Mhm.
Please invite them. And literally overnight, it went from 30 people to 250 people.
Wow.
And now it's 4 years later. We have 1,100 members. I'm fairly confident that I have almost every referee that is in pro wrestling, at least affiliated with it, if not in the group.
Right.
I have a merchandise line that I created to fund a nonprofit charity that I created because referees aren't paid to travel almost ever.
Right.
So we have shirts and sweaters and all kinds of stuff like that on Pro Wrestling Tees. And once a month, we actually donate money to a referee that applies to the charity to help them travel to a new location. And then after all of that was like really well established, people just kind of kept asking and kept asking, like, Zebra Talk, that sounds like the name of a podcast. Like, why isn't that a podcast yet? And I'm like, yeah, okay. I mean, I guess I should make a podcast. So I made a podcast, and that started. We dropped our first episode on March 1st of this year. We've had like Brian Hebner, Aubrey, Jimmy Corderas. We just dropped Brandon Toll from Impact today. We've got a lot of other great referees lined up, and it's not just like super high profile contracted people either. Like there's people that are on the rise right now. My friend Jeremy Marcus was our first episode. He's signed to New Japan Pro Wrestling right now. Um, Nick Bonanno, who's the head referee at Championship Wrestling from Hollywood and my mentor and one of my best friends, he's on there as well. Like I kind of wanted to intentionally intersperse like people that would garner a lot of attention and kind of pad it with people that I feel like are a good representation of like quality referees in our community. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah. Now you mentioned in this group, I mean,
Mhm.
the podcast, all of it, this sounds great. And you're doing good things with
Thanks.
literally giving money to the referees in need who are trying to just go and work and they
Yeah.
can't necessarily get from town to town. Or
We don't keep a profit. We just turn it all back into it.
that's awesome. Um, you mentioned this, the grouping a resource,
Mhm.
where you could talk about issues pertaining to refereeing. And, there are some things that like, oh, hey, this keeps happening, or I'm doing this wrong, or how can I do this better? I mean, what's an
Right.
example of something that maybe you struggled with earlier on in your career as a referee that, you've since figured out?
Sure. There's a very common one that comes up regularly because like it's been a group for so long now that the thread is miles long. There's
Mhm.
so much interaction on the group and like I love promoting the group as its own entity because like I just had an idea, but like these guys really just like took off with it, guys, girls, and like everybody in between. We have anyway, but the to answer your question, triple threats is something that comes up very often,
Mhm.
including like no DQ matches, specifically in regards to whether or not rope breaks are legal or not in triple threat matches in particular, but also in no disqualification matches. And luckily, we have members from literally, like I said, all the way at the top to all the way, started yesterday. And Jimmy Corderas has been very kind to come in every so often, every couple of months. Somebody new that just got added to the group will be like, hey, what about rope breaks in a triple threat? And we all like that have been in there since the first week are just like, oh, here we go again. Okay, cool. Let's have this conversation. But yeah, that one comes up a lot.
Well, I mean, to settle it for anyone
Sure.
who's watching this or listening, what about
So
rubrics and a triple threat?
the answer to any question when it comes to whether or not something is or isn't in pro wrestling is the answer lies with the promoter.
Mhm.
Every promoter has the right to choose what rules they do and don't enforce in their promotion. So a really hard thing for a lot of referees to accept is that there is no just ironclad answer for a lot of the questions because it can vary from company to company. But traditional, let's call it like television wrestling rules state that the ropes are a plane and it separates where legal falls can and cannot occur.
Mhm.
So you are not disqualified when you get counted to a 5 when you're holding on to the ropes. You're actually counted out because you're outside of the plane of where legal action can take place. So there's your answer. That comes from Corderis. If I'm wrong, it came from Corderis.
Wow.
But yeah, he comes on. That's kind of his hill to die on. He comes on every couple of months and just answers that one. But like, we get way less, stressful questions. Things like, what are the best kind of pants that I should wear? What are the best kind of shoes that I should wear? Should I wear knee pads? Which is the most ridiculous question that we get all the time. And I'm like, why wouldn't you wear knee pads? Your knees are gonna die. But yeah, we get all kinds of stuff.
Well, I mean, there are some wrestlers who insist still upon not wearing knee pads. I mean,
That's their right. They can do whatever they do. But like me personally, I'm sliding around on my knees. It's in my podcast intro. We talk about sliding on our knees and counting the threes. But yeah, I've worn knee pads literally since the first day, and I'm a very, very big proponent of wearing knee pads. Absolutely.
are there? So I'm just fascinated by this. I mean, I knew the thing about the rope being the plane of the ring. I had never thought about the rope break being a count out issue as opposed to a submission issue, but I did, um, think about. I have thought about it in terms of, oh well, this guy can't get away now because it's it's a no disqualification match and he's grabbing on the ropes, but he it can't be made to break the hold. And it's like, yeah, but
So that's where the
yeah,
trouble lies with most
right,
people is when it's a no disqualification match.
right,
Often we forget that the announcer will also say the following match has no disqualifications and no countouts.
right.
So then if that is implied as well,
Mhm.
then you can grab the ropes, you can go outside, you can do whatever, whatever, whatever. And the ref is just kind of there to maintain some order. But like first and foremost, our biggest job is making sure that everybody's safe.
Right.
Like a lot of people think we're just there to count threes or ring the bell or, like enforce rules, but like everybody's picking each other up and dropping each other and kicking each other in the face and doing flips and flying and like there needs to be someone right there in that moment. Like I've had tons of injuries that have occurred in my matches. Like it happens every day. We see it all the time. So like, I think that's a very easily forgotten part of our job and something that like I really try to emphasize as well through Zebra Talk and with my peers, like making sure that we're all CPR certified, making sure that we have concussion protocol training, making sure that like we know how to keep our calm when really bad things happen because sometimes really bad things happen.
Mhm.
But anyway.
Yeah, I mean that's there are a lot of roles that a referee will take on.
Mhm.
Um, I mean, down to in a televised promotion, they're getting signals from the back. In a lot of cases, there's a lot of different things that can happen. In the case of an injury, how do you make that call? If it looks like somebody's a little bit maybe glassy eyed, they might be concussed, they might be hurt.
Mhm.
Obviously, you the first instinct I'm sure is to ask them if they're okay to proceed. But
Right.
when do you know, like, what, I have to look out for this wrestler's well being even if they're not going to do it? How do you make a call like that?
We have this conversation a lot, and like it really is a very difficult call to make in
Mhm.
certain situations, like when it's not super apparent. Like if somebody can't stand, or if their leg is broken, or they can't
Mhm.
lift their arms, like the match is over. There's nothing that we can do, or like maybe somebody will find a way to pin them or something. But like, yeah, if somebody's incapable of protecting themselves and functioning properly, safely, like sorry, it happened. um
Mhm.
but for the most part, most wrestlers that I know would prefer, if it's physically possible and safe without further injuring themselves, to continue. They'd prefer to continue. We've all heard the story of Stone Cold or Brock Lesnar or whoever else breaking their neck in the middle of a match and finishing the match. Like that's not a decision I can make for anybody, but it just comes down to communicating with the person who's very clearly hurt, communicating with their opponent or opponents, and just making a split second judgment call, based on past experiences, based on training, and based on your judgment. Like, it's a really intense call to make, honestly. Like, there's a lot of those in the referee role where like you have that long to figure out like, okay, are we doing this? Are we doing this? Because the whole show is riding on this, or this person's health is riding on this, or whatever else. My job is riding on this. Like, and at the end of the day, I would much rather sacrifice my job and make sure that someone's safe. And if like I end a match and somebody needed it to be ended and they weren't happy about that, like maybe we shouldn't be there. But the wrestlers, for the most part, will be able to make the call themselves.
Interesting. I mean, is there anything, you have this group now, which is a wonderful resource and probably the kind of thing that you wish you would have had starting out, I'm sure.
Yeah.
Is there, if you had to pick one or two things that you wish you'd known when you started down your path as a referee, what would those be?
I wish that I had known that the bottom of my wrestling shoes were going to get me heat.
Interesting.
I
Why is
know
that?
that's a really silly thing to comment on, and there's other like better things that I can mention, but like that is the first thing that popped into my head because uh, a referee should, by traditional standards, be in a very, very uniform.
Mhm.
We're in the striped shirts. We have a black undershirt. You should be wearing black under your pants because it will happen that your pants will split. It's happened to me. And if they are not black when it happens, you will find out the hard way that they should have been. Uh, Belt, mine weren't. I found out the hard way. It's something we talked about in the Corderis episode. He had blue. But yeah, black shoes and black socks. What I didn't realize was that black shoes meant all the way to the bottom
Mm.
because my first pair of wrestling shoes that I used as my ref shoes for like 3 or 4 years were actually, they have tan soles on them.
Right.
So like they stuck out like a sore thumb on camera and to people who were looking for it, but like I didn't realize that that was going to be a thing. People, would comment on it and be like, "Oh, what are you trying to get over? You trying to be like a Red Shoes or something like that?" And I'm like, "No, I went to the Dick's Sporting Goods and I looked for black wrestling shoes and I was like, oh, those are black, cool." And I just kept
Right.
those. But yeah, I wish I had known about that a little bit earlier on so that I could have avoided all of those conversations. I wish that I was taught how to. I feel like social media presence, locker room etiquette, things like that are really, really easily left out in professional wrestling, like, and in training in general. Knowing how to speak, when to speak, who to talk to about getting bookings, how to do it professionally. I'm really lucky that like I come from kind of a corporate professional background. I've been working since I was like 16.
Mhm.
I know how to write a cover letter. I know how to write like I wrote essays in college. I was going to be an English major, but you know what I mean? Like
Mhm.
that kind of stuff is really, really easily like left out in pro wrestling in a lot of places. And like you see it so often. It's like people talk on Twitter about like, getting booking requests that start with someone just going, "Hey," and it's like, man, come on, like myself included. Like I'm sure the first couple of years that I was around, I was just sticking my foot in my mouth left and right, like in person, online, like all over the place. Um, Lastly, and probably most importantly, at least for me personally, I wish I was taught how to eat and how to work out because I was taught very well how to be a ref and how to understand wrestling. And we almost did no like actual like exercise and there was no nutritional education.
Right.
Uh, which like it varies from school to school and company to company, but like my trainers were all about work out on your own time, come here and learn how to wrestle. And I totally appreciate that because I feel like I got a really great crash course in learning how to like be involved in a pro wrestling match and on a show and things like that.
Right.
But like you can go back and look at old pictures of me. I have a really scraggly beard. I don't do my hair ever. It's really like shaggy and uh I just
I'm right here, Odie.
you're not, trying to like be on television and like
No,
stand
no,
next to like Hammerstone or, like guys like that, or my buddy Steven Tresario, cheap plug. Uh, but like these, Greek gods that we're standing next to are these
yeah.
gorgeous women, that like they look like the peak of physical human capability. And like,
Oh
I
yeah,
just had no idea.
I had a very brief cameo on MLW early last year, pre-pandemic,
Mhm.
and I was next to Brian Pillman Jr. and Alicia too. And I was kind of like, oh man, like,
I gotta show you an old picture of me like before I like kind of got the hey brother. Like it
yeah,
was pretty rough. Like one of the best matches I ever had a chance to be a part of, one of the most high profile matches I ever had to be had a chance to be a part of, was before I was smartened up to like, if you want the job, look like you want the job.
right.
I refed the first Stardom Championship on American soil,
Oh man,
uh, between Mercedes Martinez and Tony Storm before they had gotten signed,
right.
and it was an incredible opportunity,
Hmm.
and I looked like garbage. I looked awful. I go back and I look at it and I seriously cringe. I'm sweating all over, my hair's in a million different places. Like it's just not a good scene. So like that's definitely something that like referees in particular, I wish we were taught a little bit more about. You can be any size, you can have facial hair, you can have your hair whatever you like, but like making sure that you look as professional as possible. It's not about having to be jacked or skinny or tall or short or whatever it is, just being the best representation of yourself.
Sure, but I mean, there is a certain amount of conditioning that goes along with it. I mean, I know. Geez, the last show I was at was the GCW Backyard Wrestling
Mhm.
show, and I've known Adam Galt for a long time.
I love
Referee.
Adam Galt, one of the best referees in the world. Like, if you guys don't know who Adam Galt is, I don't mean to cut you off, but like,
No, please.
please pause this, look him up. Like, this guy is gonna be on your television. He already is on certain television,
Yeah,
but like, he's gonna be signed somewhere for a very, very long time. He's one of the best referees in the world. Please continue.
just a. I'm sure he'll appreciate hearing that, and just a wonderful guy too. But yeah, I saw him. I mean, after I pulled him aside actually to get a couple of quick quotes for a previous episode of this podcast.
Sure.
Just and yeah, I mean, he was hustling just as much as the wrestlers that were out there. I mean, he's not executing the moves, but he's got to keep up with them. He's got to follow them. You know, they're outside of the ring, they're in the ring, they're up, they're down. He's got to be there to count the threes, to
Mhm.
see if they're anybody submits, if ever make sure everyone's okay. Of course, all the important behind the scenes aspects of it that you mentioned. And yeah, I mean, he's like, oh, let me get like sip of water first. And I'm like, I know
Yeah,
he,
I'll give you
you
a
know,
quote, but let me catch my breath, brother.
yeah, exactly. And it's like, yeah, I don't blame you. I saw you out there. I could tell, you know, I was paying extra close attention to you because I know
Mhm.
you. Um, and yeah, I mean, I think you need, you know, even if you're someone of my size, for example, I mean, it's the same thing as if you're going to be a wrestler and you're bigger. I mean, different sizes are fine. You just have to be ready to go out there and do what you have to do.
Yeah,
Um,
absolutely. We've seen many, many examples of like larger referees over the years that are just as talented and just as capable as
mhm,
people half their size.
mhm.
Uh, and like you said, it's not about like being a particular image. It's about being able to keep up and being able to perform at a high level. Like a lot of people forget that like refereeing is basically shouting while doing wind sprints and burpees the whole time for 10 minutes, 20 minutes. Like I always love when we have a show where there's a special guest referee.
Right.
We had Scorpio Sky do one at Championship Wrestling from Hollywood once, and inevitably they, like they're not like dead or blown or anything like that, but they always come to the back and they're like, "You guys work a lot more than I thought you did." And we're like, "Yeah." Like a lot of people think we just kind of stand around and wait for a pinfall, but like,
Right.
we're not doing anything compared to what they're doing. We're not killing
Sure.
our body or, leaping over the top rope or anything like that. But like, it's an athletic competition and you have to be right there with them. Like, if you're in there with Trey Miguel and like Ray Horace, like, you better believe you're going to be sprinting. Those guys are fast, man, and you're going to be dead by the end of the match, but you got to be ready to go out after the next one, because guess what? You got 3 more matches to do.
Yeah, I mean, and that's something that maybe goes overlooked, is that it's not one and done. So
Yeah.
maybe you're not having to take, I mean, you may have to take a bump or two throughout the show. Hopefully
Mhm.
not more than one, but
Hopefully.
yeah, yeah. But I mean, this is really the same in some other areas as well. I mean, I know my sister's old high school tennis coach. I mean, he coaches professional, or excuse me, he referees professional matches. And I mean,
Mhm.
it's not an accident that he keeps getting work. I mean, he knows how to keep up and how to keep a keen eye on everything.
Yeah.
And it's an underrated skill. I mean, it's something that you do have to work at. I mean, and as you mentioned, I mean, you were in there essentially doing some of the fundamentals with the wrestlers in your class. I mean, you have to know how to take a bump. You have to
Yeah.
know how to move around the ring. Um, you have to know how to stay out of the way and some other things when needed. There are really
Right.
a lot of different skills that you have to juggle. So uh, kudos. I mean, it's
Thanks.
thankless work sometimes, but you
You
know,
know, a lot of people say that, and to an extent it is true, but it actually makes it stand out that much more when you find the wrestlers or the promoters who do value what it is that you do. Because it's
mhm,
not, every single wrestler is just gonna like blow you off or something like that. Some of them
sure,
do, like, they are focused on their match, or,
yeah,
what they've got coming up next, or maybe they haven't eaten, they need to get in the next town, whatever. But like, the ones that really like stop and take a second and like make a point of being like, I really appreciated your match, or like even more than that, the ones that like actually request to have you in their match, like there's no bigger compliment that a referee can get than a wrestler like specifically saying like, I've worked with you, I work really well with you, I want to make sure that like you're in there so I know that I don't have to worry about anything. It's like the biggest pat on the back that you could ever get. Or yeah.
fantastic. Is there anything else you'd like to? I give you a chance to, of course, plug everything. But is there
Sure.
anything else you want to get out there before we get into the plug section of the
Um,
interview?
I think we covered it pretty well. Just try and, you know, it always stands out to me a little bit when I ask a wrestler who the referee was in their match and they can't tell me the person's name. Make a point of knowing the name of the person who's in there with you. Even if they're bad, that gives you an opportunity to like help them grow. A lot of people in pro wrestling want to just kind of like check a box that someone's bad at their job and just like write them off. And there was a lot of that when I started Zebra Talk. Some people were like, you should make a different group that's just for the good refs or whatever. And I'm like, okay, well, who gets to decide who the good refs are? Because I'm 2 years into the business, so I probably shouldn't be the person deciding who the good refs are.
Right.
um, but my point is like, know who your refs are. Take opportunities to help people grow. It doesn't have to be, like a long-term mentorship or something like that, but it really, really helps us, especially people who don't have a mentor or a trainer or anything like that that can teach them how to be better, to pull us aside from everybody for 5 minutes and be like, hey, this is what happened. This is what could have gone better. Let's see if we can work on it so that the next time you're in that situation, it doesn't happen again. You know what I mean?
Absolutely. Well, I want to thank you for taking the time to do this. What's the best way to learn more about all this? To maybe if someone's a referee and they
Sure.
somehow are not in the group, or if someone just wants to
There's
listen to the podcast.
It blows me away. Honestly, I encourage everybody in the group to invite every ref that they know regularly. I had a new person added today and yesterday. We add new people every day. We're on like every country where there is wrestling. We're in 6 continents. Like it's a pretty amazing group. But if you are not in the Zebra Talk group, please find me on Facebook at Robert Odie Brown. Odie is spelled O-D-I-E. I'm sure it'll be written somewhere around here. You can find me on Twitter and Instagram at Odie1Canody. Or we do have socials for Zebra Talk itself. You can find us on Instagram, Twitter. You can find the podcast. All of it is Zebra Talk 123. And if you are a referee and you're thinking about applying to the Zebra Talk Fund, is what I like to call the charity that we had mentioned earlier, you can actually email me at zebratalk123@gmail.com and just let us know what you want to use it for.
And of course, there's the Zebra Talk Pro Wrestling Tees store. If
There
anyone,
is. Thank you. Thank you. Yeah. Zebra Talk is also, as he mentioned, on Pro Wrestling Tees. It's just prowrestlingtees.com/Zebra Talk. We've got lots of great merchies for you to pick up. We've got some variety of t-shirts and we've got sweaters. I've got tracksuits for sale. This is one that Juan Ortiz just designed for us not too long ago.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, we would really appreciate any kind of sales, or just come say hi. If you're a ref, please join Zebra Talk. We'd really like to have you in there.
All right. Well, Odie, thank you for taking the time to do this.
Thank you very much for having me. I really appreciate it.